Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome each and every one of you. This is almost like Old Home Week. I mean, I see very few people out in this audience that have not been involved in this process somewhere along the line over the last 5 to 7 years. And that really is how long this has been going on. But let me come back to that in a minute. First of all, I'd like to thank the YWCA for making this wonderful facility available to us. This is a room that brings back memories, and that years ago we used it for a crime forum. This is a room that brings back memories, and a building that brings back memories, because this facility was actually part of an economic development effort. The Y was downtown. I'm sure lots of you in this room remember that. They were running out of room. They looked around. The philanthropic community and the business community came together with the Y and put together a plan. It was a quite complex plan, as all plans are in Harrisburg. But having said that, occasionally good can come out of one of these complex Harrisburg plans. And you're sitting in a representation of some of the good that can come out of one of those complex Harrisburg plans. It involved initiative from the not-for-profit community, it involved the business community, and it involved the financiers. So any of those entities could have done things that would have made this a bad deal. We wouldn't be here today, or we'd be in a rundown facility, or they'd still be downtown. My point is that when the various factions come together, we can produce some good for the city of Harrisburg and the region. And we would like to have a situation in which we have the outcome be more good than harm. Thank you for coming. I'm Les Ford. I'm the moderator tonight, and I am the co-chair of the Harrisburg Task Force. I'd like to thank the team that has been gathered since January, February to essentially lay the foundation, the groundwork for where we are now and where we have to go. I won't steal anybody's thunder by getting into particulars of the plan or the presentation, but I will say this is just, again, the next step along the road. We can go back to 5 years ago, and there are lots of people in this room who were involved in this effort at least 5 years ago. I see the mayor back there, Pappenfuss. I don't see Neil Grover. I don't see Kara. I see Nevin. Nevin, where are you? Nevin is going to participate. Nevin's here tonight. These are all people who have followed this process over the course of the last 5 years at least. And we have changed and modified and evolved our positions over that time. And we have disagreed about particular points over that time, or overarching philosophy over that time. But we've never given up the fight. We've never put ourselves on the side and simply said, problem can't be solved, or I don't need to make a contribution. We all need to make a contribution. The city of Harrisburg, the county of Dauphin, and the state of Pennsylvania are in that dire a situation that we all need to continue to make our efforts count for the overall good. Having said all that, those people I mentioned were part of Debt Watch Harrisburg. I'm sorry, Bill, I forgot about you. You appeared at some of those meetings. And we had different positions then, right? Some of us were for bankruptcy, some were against bankruptcy. But ultimately, you have to accept the reality of where you are. That was then, this is now. So at some point when you're in the poker game, you've got to play the hand you're dealt. So this is where we are now, and we are trying to make the best of it. So this is the latest team that is trying to make a team contribution to the next steps. And we'll get to where those steps, we think those next steps will take us. But let me give you a little bit more history in that I would like to thank David Unglevig, who's not here, who was the first receiver. I'd like to thank General Lynch, who was the second receiver, these people who carried the ball forward. And they played significant roles, and the general handed it off to Fred He won't accept that, but we who have been working on this committee pretty much understand the important role that Fred is playing. So I would like to thank Fred. I would like to thank those who came before and who are still in the fight, and those who have moved on. And Fred is being assisted by our recording secretary, Ann Morrow, in the back there, who plays a very, very important role. When we were putting together who's going to do what on this committee, we all decided that the most important thing was someone to keep us straight, to keep the records, to keep the official proceedings of what had transpired, so that when we had a question, we could go back and question what we said. I certainly need to do that myself. I suspect that many other people on the panel need to do that. So our special thanks to those who have gone before and have made their efforts, and we invite them and you to continue to help us try to solve this financial problem in which we find ourselves. So this team represents, as I said earlier, a multi-tiered, a multi-level approach, and it is the state of Pennsylvania, the county of Dauphin, the city of Harrisburg, and oh yes, by the way, the surrounding area coming together once again to try to help us to put Harrisburg's financial house in order. So it is a very complex team, complex scenario. It has indeed a complex history, a storied history. The Novak Group was working on this problem back during the Rendell administration. The Reed administration and the Thompson administrations had to deal with this problem. Now we have the Pat Cruz administration trying to deal with this. And Governor Corbett obviously is playing an important role in this. So I'm just trying to not forget anybody. I'm also trying to indicate to you how complex this problem is and how many people have made a contribution. Now, how is a problem complex? We are under the court. Judge Ledbetter has given us a charge. So the charge is, as Fred keeps reminding us, to develop an action plan and a governance structure. And there are $16 million. And there are 2 silos. So it's not very complex. You know, we've got $16 million, we've got a judge's order, we've got a couple of silos. So we ought to be able to move forward. Why have we been sitting around for 5 months trying to formulate this problem? Well, I used to be a teacher. I was a high school teacher, and I love visual aids. So we have a Rubik's Cube, which to me represents the perfect model for complexity. We have 6 facets or aspects to this cube. Sort of like having 2 silos and a couple of tasks of governance and the action plan. And we have the county and we have the state. So pretty simple, straightforward. But this is where you get to the end. You get all the colors where they're supposed to be. This is where you get at the end. But that's not where you start out. You start out with something like this. Okay, so basically that's where we are now. We're still here, and we are still trying to find a formula for this complex problem that will give us an opportunity to get to the solution. So I love those visual aids. Will we get to every color where it's supposed to be? Probably not. But we will get closer than we are now. If we subdivide the problem, if we bring the proper resources together, it is my sincere belief that we will be able to make Harrisburg a better place for our children. So, now that I've given you somewhat of the history in terms of us being involved with this for years and years and years, and probably most of you know that yourselves, I've talked about the roles played by various groups, state, county, and local government. I've convinced you of the complexity of the problem, even though it's very simple. Here's $16 million, you've got 5 years, you've got 2 silos, and those 2 silos represent 2 areas of concern: economic development and infrastructure. But as we go through the presentation, you will see that we have spent hours discussing economic development, what comprises economic development, and what comprises infrastructure. And we have sort of tweaked things here and there in ways that we think that will allow us to touch on many areas of concern to the people in the city. So again, it sounds very straightforward, but you will see as we get into the presentation that we want to use those scarce resources in a way that will have maximum impact. We are stewards, and we ourselves are not the stewards because there will be a follow-on committee that will be the execution committee for this. We are the committee put together to go forward through the first chapter and set the foundation for the next group that will follow us. Now, there may be some faces that you'll see on the next group, I don't know. But our charge is to do the best we can to get the game started. We'll probably play the first quarter, and then someone will decide that the players should change here and there, and we'll go ahead and do the best we can. At any rate, without further ado, we have the members of the team in no particular order. Pat Stringer, raise your hand, please.
Pat Stringer, the nominee from council, 41-year resident of Harrisburg, retired. Thank you.
Dave Black, who's hiding incognito. He's in Mufti tonight.
I'll move up on the power.
Okay, all right. Shannon Williams.
Yes.
Shannon is the Capital Region Water CEO.
That's correct.
Will that do? Is that close enough? All right. Carl Singleton. Carl, you want to introduce yourself? Mayor's senior assistant, senior advisor. Neil Grover, who is the city solicitor, who is not here. He's on the team and an integral part of this process since the very beginning. Jackie Parker, who's the head of the economic development team for the city, is not here tonight. Laura Carlson, who's with the county, is here tonight, and she is has been tagged by the county to take care of all things having to do with the recovery of the city and our financial health. So you talk about responding, you talk about being flexible. The county has devoted resources to us, so we're going to make the best of that. And I hope the city does the same thing, and I'm certain that the state is going to continue to do the fine job that they've been doing. Fred Reddick. Fred has been involved in this process. How long now, Fred?
That's about 3.5 years.
Okay, because I saw your face during the days of the Novak group, right? You made a guest appearance here and there. So he's very familiar with the problem, and he's a tremendous resource. And finally, Steve Goldfield, who's not here, who is an attorney and financial consultant and expert, who has been working with the state and with the city now. Well, he's been working with the city for almost 2 years now.
He's under contract.
Right. But the state's picking up the tab. At any rate, Steve has been involved in this process, and again, it's a very special resource on which we can draw when we have those kinds of questions. So, if you look at your program, you'll see that we're going to have a PowerPoint, and we're going to touch on sort of the major tasks and overarching activities of the task force. And we're having just a little change here in that after we do that presentation, true to form, Nevin has presented us with a document which he would like to read. So as soon as we're finished with the PowerPoint, we will allow Nevin the opportunity to read his presentation. It's only 2 pages. And I think that if we're going to have a point counterpoint, it will be at that point that we can go forward with that. Which is not to say that Nevin's the only one who's going to be talking tonight, because I'm sure we have a very vocal group here, given that most of you are very familiar with the problem already. But Nevin did go to the effort to put together a document for us, so we're going to have Nevin read that immediately after the PowerPoint. So without further ado, Doug will take over. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, and wonderful to see such a great turnout. I'll introduce myself a little bit more. I'm Doug Hill. Out in the real world, I'm Executive Director of a Local Government Association here in Harrisburg, and I've been working the state and local government trenches for about 35 years now. And it's my pleasure to co-chair this task force with Les. It was also my pleasure to be a late inning substitute on the advisory committee to the Harrisburg receiver. And of course, in that context, I recognize many faces in the crowd. Really appreciate the input that you all have given to the process so far, and the support you've given to the city in working through toward recovery. This is a very brief PowerPoint presentation because really the point of us being here tonight isn't to talk to you and lecture to you. It's really to give you an idea of what we're doing, our progress to date, where we're going from here, and then to get your comments and suggestions and questions on what that's all about. So, no further ado. What I want to cover in this PowerPoint is to just give you a quick glimpse of the background of what we're working on, purpose of the task force, who we are, the 501c3 that is all a part of this process, the requirements that have been placed on the task force by the receiver's report, and then talk about the work to date, next steps, and then from there we'll go into the public comment period. First, by way of background, I think everybody in the room has some conceptual knowledge, at least, of the Harrisburg Strong Plan. Remarkable detail, remarkable amount of work, extremely complex transactions that were all a part of it, but the bottom line really is that it was a comprehensive solution, puts in place a comprehensive plan toward a solution for the city's structural deficit. It dealt with a couple of major components of that deficit, including the incinerator debt and creditor issues, and then, most importantly, provide a path for the city to continue to grow from here. One of the elements of the plan is that the receiver set aside a certain amount of available funding to undertake some projects that kind of fill in around the edges. And specifically, there is about $6.1 million set aside for economic development projects, and another $6.1 million set aside for infrastructure improvement. There's additional money that we anticipate receiving from PennDOT as well. That'll be about $10 million altogether, and that's all figured in as a part of this. And I do want to emphasize, this has been a very transparent process. I have the website listed here for the receiver's information, www.pa.gov/Harrisburg receiver, written as all one word. But if you have interest in looking at any of the documents that were generated as a part of the process, not just the final report, but the minutes of the advisory committee, all the other related documents and filings from the time the Office of the Receiver was created until the report was accepted, all that's available on that website. So I recommend that to you to get more information. Now, the purpose tonight is to do two things. First, I want to talk about the purpose of the task force, and then we'll talk about the purpose of the meeting. The task force is actually spelled out in the receiver's report, and it is charged with putting together two 501c3 corporations. And the corporations are intended to administer the funding that I was talking about. So the pot of money that's available for economic development is one 501c3 called for, and then the second one is created to administer the infrastructure improvement programs. This task force is responsible for doing all the documents necessary for incorporation, as well as providing for their structure and governance, and then most importantly, and particularly important for tonight's discussion, is to put together information on what those corporations are to do in how they handle the money, the projects that are going to be eligible for funding, who can apply, those kinds of things. Now, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to give you an idea of what we've been doing so far, answer your questions about the 501c3 and its role in the plan, and how that's going to, how the projects that are created are intended to grow the city. Tonight is not designed as a session to hear about specific projects that you'd like to pursue. We're not going to prohibit you from doing that because we know many of you have some ideas along those lines. But this group will not be the group that is actually determining which projects are going to be taken. Rather, we're putting in place the corporations that will make those decisions. If you do have ideas for projects, then please write them down. We gave you all comment cards that you can put those on. And once the corporations are in place, all that information certainly will be channeled to them. But if you have ideas on specific types of projects, specific areas of the city that need attention, specific kinds of things that these corporations should be looking at, that is most certainly welcome as a part of tonight's discussion.
Do you want to touch on the evolution of the concept of 501c3?
Yes. I would get to that. Yes. And then the last, of course, is to get your input on the work to date and where we go next. Okay. Again, this group was created specifically under the Strong Plan. We were appointed by the Harrisburg receiver. There are 9 members of this task force, 3 appointed by the receiver, 2 nominated by the mayor, 2 by city council, and 2 by the Dauphin County commissioners. And the membership was listed earlier, and I think is elsewhere in some of the information that you got. We were organized in February. Our first meeting was March 10th, and under the receivers, under the Strong Plan rather, we have 4 months to make a report back to the coordinator and to the court. And so our target date for completion of all this work is June 30th. I have to say a couple other things as well. First, we fully believe we were going to meet that timeline and actually best in 3 days. Second, we were given a small budget, about $100,000 to undertake this entire process. We're going to bring it in well under budget, and so we're happy to report that to you as well. Now, what and why on a 501c3? Well, I'm not sure how many of you I know many of you are familiar with 501c3s and what they are, but basically that's part of the Internal Revenue Service Code. 501c sets out the types of organizations that have special tax treatment under federal law, and then Pennsylvania law follows suit on how those corporations are treated. Specifically, a 501c3 is a nonprofit corporation. It has a tax exemption, and it exists for charitable purposes. And so it carries out certain types of charitable projects. Those are enumerated in the statute. We don't need to go into that in detail. The other thing that it can do is receive donations, and the donations that it receives are tax qualified, and so are exempt for the donor. Now, under the Harrisburg Strong Plan, as I mentioned, it requires the creation of 2 501c3s, one to do infrastructure improvement and a separate one to do economic development. The Strong Plan also sets aside a certain amount of funding to create a trust to administer about $3 million for what's called other post-employment benefits, OPEB for short. That's actually a more direct relationship with the city, and that's not part of what this group is tasked with doing. Now, why a 501c3? When the receiver put the plan together, the notion was to say not only are we going to try to deal with these core systemic issues that are plaguing the city, but we also want to provide a path and a model for future growth. And so recovery is part of it, but moving forward is the bigger part. And so compared to the size of the transaction, $12 million for these 2 projects, $10 million from PennDOT, doesn't sound like a huge amount of money compared to the larger part of the recovery program. But it does provide that valuable seed money to help move us in a different direction, help us move forward down the path. The receiver's intent was to set this up as an independent body to administer these funds, to provide better public access, to provide better coordination among the various entities that are involved in meeting the objectives of the plan. And so that's why it's set out as a separate entity. And it is capable and required under the plan to accept the funds, not only the ones that are available from the plan, but funds that it raises from other sources, and that can be donations, that can be other grants, that can be other federal, state, or private funding. The specific requirements that the plan asks us to hit, check boxes, if you will, in the final report, are to create the administrative structure and how we're going to use the funds. The funds, by the way, are derived from the parking transaction, from creditor settlements, from PennDOT, and from contributions. And then to provide a grant framework on how the money is going to be driven out into the community, the time frames, and all of the other qualifications that are part of that. And then the very specific requirement is that we meet the largest objective, which is to promote job creation, improve the city's economic vitality, and that's not just downtown, that is the city and all its neighborhoods, grow the tax base, and generally improve the quality of life for the citizens, as well as those who work here and come here for recreation and other purposes. As it is structured, it anticipates a minimum 5-year organizational life. That's an issue we're still talking about, but we're pretty certain it will continue to be a 5-year minimum. We have to provide for public access and full public accountability. So even though 501c3 generally reports just to the ownership, if you will, of 501c3, and is not strictly speaking a governmental entity, we are still required by the plan to set it up in a way that provides public access, not only to its workings, but to its documentation and the other things that it's doing. And then, again, the reporting recommendations are to be submitted to the coordinator and to the court within 4 months, within a 4-month deadline. So let's now talk about where we are today. And this is really, the first thing we did was divide into 3 working committees. One relates to governance structure, the second relates to funding process and grant structure, and the third relates to public outreach. And this has been a lengthy and detailed process. We've been meeting at least every 3 weeks as the full body, and then the subcommittees have been meeting much more frequently than that in between. So there has been a good bit of time invested in this, and a lot of complex issues that we've wrestled through, and some that we're still working our way through right now. Under governance structure, we're talking about putting together a single 501c3. You know, the report, the plan recommends 2. Our initial determination was putting them together into a single 501c3 accomplishes a couple purposes. First and foremost, it's more efficient, so one body rather than 2 to deal with these funds. But more to the point, as you get to looking at economic development and infrastructure improvement, there are inevitably overlaps. And not only in terms of the project and the things you're trying to accomplish, but also in terms of the organizations and the individuals and entities who are trying to put them together. And so to us, it just seemed to make more sense to make it a single 501c3. Now, by requirement of the plan, we will keep the funds segregated, and the grants will still be segregated based on one pot or the other, but it will be under one governing body, one governing structure. The funding process and the grant structure is the one that is taking, I would say, the most time, because it is complex and requires a fair amount of attention to detail. The guiding principles that we're working from are the ones that are enunciated in the plan. I mentioned them earlier, but the question is how we carry those out. And so we're doing a number of very specific things. First, determination is who is eligible for the funding. The city is the major partner, there's no question about that. The authority is eligible as well, but as we're working through the structure right now, we also anticipate that private developers and other community organizations will also have eligibility to submit applications. The goals that have to be achieved, it has to fit into one box or the other, economic development or infrastructure improvement. Because of the size of the funding, because of the length of time that we're administering it, these are not going to be huge, huge projects typically, but rather they're going to be ones that fill in around the edges, or they're going to be ones that kind of make the difference in getting a larger project off the ground, or they might be able to match some other effort to get it moving. And so those are the kinds of things that we're targeting as a part of all of this. Again, we're emphasizing that this is not just about downtown, but it is about all the neighborhoods in the city. And so we want to set it up in a way that provides the broadest possible access to make sure that all those elements are dealt with. The other important key is that it also is going to be tied into the city's comprehensive plan. The city's working on a new plan that's required under the receiver's report. But in the interim, we're going to be working within the confines of the existing comprehensive plan. But the bottom line is, this isn't just random projects. We're trying to keep things coordinated and moving toward that more common goal. Public outreach. Let me add a couple more points about the grants. These will be set up fully accountable. We are working with the intent that they're going to be done based on a scoring system. And so each application, there are going to be a number of check boxes that need to be met in terms of a whole list of things: capacity of the entity to carry out the project, coordination with the city comprehensive plan. You get the idea, there will be a list of things like that. One of the other things that we want to do is maximize the available funding. And so we're going to be requiring a match for all the grants. Initially for infrastructure programs, it's probably going to be a one-to-one match. For the economic development projects, the match requirement is probably going to be a little bit higher, and we're going to have to require proof of availability to meet that match. But again, the idea is to try to stretch these dollars farther and try to leverage them to the maximum extent that we can.
Excuse me, we're having trouble hearing that here.
Okay, sorry, I'll get a little closer.
That mic's on.
I think we're on, I'm just not quite close enough. I'll just move over closer. Is that a little better? Okay. All right. In terms of public outreach, the first part of public outreach was for this group, and you see we have this meeting tonight. We have another one scheduled coming up. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the more important point of public outreach is how the 501c3 is going to relate to the public. Again, documents are going to be available. All of the accounting will be to full required auditing standards. All of the reporting will be available, and it will be an open process by which the grants are received, the grant applications are received, how they're scored, and how they're ultimately awarded, and then how they're monitored and administered. So that will be part of the process. I did make a couple comments too about the governance structure. We are, working toward a board of about 7 to 9 members. That's still a matter of discussion. We're also working through the details of how the initial appointments will be made and then how replacement appointments will be made as terms expire from that board. Again, the idea is, on the one hand, that we have to coordinate closely, particularly with the city and to a lesser degree with the county and with the authority and others. But at the same time, we're required by the plan to maintain some separation, some arm's length, if you will, for the corporation. We have retained a law firm, McNeese Wallace & Nurick, as our legal counsel to prepare the documents that we have to submit for incorporation as a 501c3. That includes documents that we have to submit at the federal level with the IRS as well as with the Commonwealth to put it in place. And we have also been working on the corporate documents and the bylaws under which it will operate, which spell out how it's to be governed, the projects, the accountability, committee structure, all those kinds of things that are part of putting together a corporation. So, next steps, where do we go from here? Well, the first thing we'll be doing after tonight is reviewing and synthesizing the comments that we get from you and adding those into the work that we've done so far. We don't have a draft to distribute to you tonight. Really, we have a set of notes and minutes and those kinds of things. And the task between now and our next meeting is to begin to put together the final report. And so the next time we get together with the public, which is scheduled for Thursday, June 19th, we will have that report and it will be available for public review and comment. The draft report will touch on the 3 things that I've discussed so far: the governance structure, the funding process and grant structure, and how we're handling public outreach. And it will be submitted, as we say, by June 30th this year. From that point, the coordinator will make a recommendation to the court, and the court will sign off. Once the court signs off, then the documents that we've prepared will go in for the incorporation process. So, with that, I'm going to turn back to Les to moderate the rest of the evening. I would anticipate that other members of the task force are going to have comments and some things to add, and probably some things I said that they want to correct or embellish upon, so I'll certainly allow them to do that. But the other thing that I want to point out particularly is that if you don't have any comments tonight but have something that you still would like to submit to us, or if you represent other organizations that might want to mull it over a little bit and send some things in, on your agenda and up here on the screen is the address to send things to us. We've given you the postal address, an email, and a fax number. And so any of those that you care to use to get your comments into us, and we can certainly welcome that anytime between now and when we submit our final report. So with that, Les, back to you.
Thank you, Doug. As I said, Nevin has prepared some remarks. I think that is quite fitting. We talked about the autonomy of the committee that will go forward and execute the next steps. Part of that process of developing that autonomy is to listen to many voices. And there are many voices on this panel. And we've had many discussions. All of them have reached some point of agreement, or at least agreed to disagree, but we've been very civil about that. And sort of the ground rules for tonight consist of just be respectful to one another, and if you disagree, don't be disagreeable about it. And we do have a 2-hour window here. So try to get to the point, try to be succinct, try to make sure we understand what you're trying to tell us. And let's have the panel deal with some of the questions as necessary, but let's try to get through this process. This is the intro. You'll have another opportunity on the 19th to really bring out the big guns. So we all look forward to that. Nevin? And you have copies, you have a few copies of this, right? You're going to leave a few copies on the back?
I have a couple extra copies that I can make available to people. And my fellow citizens, I wanted to indicate I did not ask for this courtesy, and I appreciate it, but I really meant only to seize the opportunity to speak. From my perspective, there are two and only two purposes for the set-asides for infrastructure and community development. That is blight and infrastructure. Not one penny should be used to subsidize private investment. This community has had its fill of rent-seeking development. By that I mean the game of the mighty to convert public power into personal profit. Rent-seeking is an incestuous political game. We've watched it here in Harrisburg, where government and favored organized interests work together. Government raises the banner of economic advantage through planning and managing the advertised outcome. In turn, favored interests seek and are given more power in the form of monopoly subsidies or tax breaks or grants. The Harrisburg community is done with the old political game of privatizing profits and socializing losses. Let me be blunt. Public dollars should be spent only on public investment. Blight remediation is economic development, and it provides a return on investment to the public. This understanding is well comprehended in Detroit, where money is being spent on blight and crime as a key means of revitalizing that city. In fact, the bankruptcy judge in the Detroit case, unlike the court here, views addressing blight and crime as providing the basic services to meet the basic needs of citizens. The return on investment to the public by the investment of public dollars in clearing blight has been well documented. I cite two studies. One by the Reinvestment Fund of Philadelphia, which indicates that increases in property values because of blight clearance result in increased transfer tax revenue, as well as increased permit fees, fines, and judgments. There's another one, the Western Reserve Land Conservancy study, which demonstrated that blight remediation strategically done provides a return of $1.40 for each $1 invested. Both references are supplied as attachments. If public dollars are invested in blight clearance, public health and safety will improve, and a return on the investment will occur without subsidizing the political friends and contributors of any politician. In turn, investors, any investors, can proceed to invest without having to absorb the cost of having to clear blight first before proceeding to develop improvements. Addressing the blight issue requires an action plan, methodically developed, clearly detailed, and strategically implemented. Detroit, again, is a good model. You need aggressive, coherent code enforcement by the city. You need to map the blight. In Detroit, blight mapping was done through private efforts. Here in Harrisburg, the Covenant Community Corporation, which is a 501c3, has begun a blight mapping project. That project began by obtaining data on publicly owned property and is proceeding in a manner that should enable eventually the identification of blighted properties through crowdsourcing methodologies so that we can all participate in identifying them. Once mapped, there are tested and substantiated methodologies that utilize market value analysis to indicate targeted investment strategies. These targeted strategies, based on analysis, help them maximize the allocation of financial resources and direct code enforcement, rehabilitation, and demolition efforts for optimal effect.
You need to have that at your mouth.
What's that?
Take it out of the stage.
Take it out and hold it at your mouth.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to start again. You want a copy, you can do it. Okay, so there are other methodologies of value. Richmond, Virginia is an example of many cities that use these targeted strategies for neighborhood development. And the issue there is where, not who. Understand the difference. Carrying out the work on blight cannon should be done through both public and private means, each with their own unique roles. We do not need to create new entities. We already have, effectively, a city land bank. The Harrisburg Redevelopment Authority at present holds title to hundreds of city properties. The HOA has the ability to take possession of additional properties, remediate the blight situation as most effective, clear the title, sell the property. But it needs a plan to do the work, and it needs to be paired with an already existing oversight entity, the Vacant Housing Reinvestment Board, which needs appointees. I had a quick look at the proposed land bank, and quite frankly, I think it's really, from what I can tell, first blush, it's the Rent Seekers Investment Board. Work can also be done through nonprofit efforts. Under the new blight law, blight remediation can be done through nonprofit conservancies. The expert consulting on this was the basis of the new law was done by a member of our Covenant Community Board, Jerry Stump, who worked on the Hill for years, and so we know where we speak. And finally, we need to assure that any sales agreements which are associated with blight remediated parcels are structured to prevent land speculators and absentee landlords from buying these publicly owned or financed properties and failing to improve the property. I'll conclude with an analogy. If you want to have a garden and you want to make it productive, the first thing you must do is clear the weeds and the wild overgrowth. Then you can make the land productive. We live in a place that set the example as the city beautiful, but it has become overgrown with blight. We need a concerted and cooperative community effort to clean up our garden. We need to begin by making an investment in clearing the blight. Then productive growth can take place. And as any gardener knows, you need a plan on how best to proceed. Thank you.
Now, why did I think that was appropriate? Because one of the things that we've talked about is not starting from scratch. We want to build on the efforts that are currently going on and the efforts that have been going on for years around the city. And Nevin belongs to one of the groups that has been actively working in the uptown neighborhood. And I think we can use some of their work as a model. You can't hear me? Oh my. I was just saying that the work that Nevin and his group has done represents a model for moving forward. And there are many examples of that have occurred in the past and are occurring currently, not only in Uptown, but on Allison Hill, all over the city. So we want to incorporate the efforts that are underway. We want to be inclusive. Now, do understand very clearly, we have deadlines to meet. And the judge is waiting for us to produce our report, and the mayor is salivating, waiting to get some of this money to execute some of those points, those very points that Nevin mentioned, such as blight. So, Harrisburg Region, Capital Region Water Authority is looking very closely at some of this. So we have private organizations that are looking very closely. So everybody is concerned that we are slow out of the block. But we feel we are being good stewards. We want a good plan. We want to execute that plan. And we want to touch on those aspects of our lives that have already been addressed by other organizations. So thank you, Nan. All right, I'm going to move this mic to the center of the room in case anybody wants to ask particular questions. And while we're getting that set up, are there any members of the panel who feel as though we've left out glaring areas of concern? Neil Grover joined us. I said that he was the city solicitor. He's been involved in this financial problem in Harrisburg for a very long time. So I think he is someone who has evolved, and I hope the rest of us evolve. I hope we can get to the point where we can accept other documents into our report and build on that. That's one of the principles we talked about. We've argued about some of this internally, and I think that we are going to produce a good product and stick to the timeline. Yes?
Time question?
Let's take the question. Yes, sir. Identify yourself.
Yes, Stan Olson, President of Greater Harrisburg NAACP. First of all, thank you for your service, and I appreciate that. But the thing that struck me the most was the fact that you're interested in improving infrastructure, and even more important than that, I think quality of life for people in Harrisburg. I can think of nothing better than doing both. It went out South 14th Street with those people with those sinkholes and had to leave their homes and condemn and improve the sinkholes so they can come back to their homes. They're displaced. And that's infrastructure and quality of life. Can we do something about that?
While members of the panel are thinking about a response to that, I mentioned that the mayor has a few targets that are high on his list of activities. And Stan, you and I talked earlier about those kinds of issues. And I will say that there was a sinkhole up on North 4th Street a year and a half ago, and the city addressed that. And understand that that activity cost about $450,000 just for that one block, and it seems that South 14th Street is more complex than that. My point being that, as we said earlier, we will be able to work around the margins of some of these problems, but we cannot address the principal part of problems like that. We can be an ancillary funding source for some of these things, and we fully believe that the state, perhaps the federal government in this case, and the city will come to us. But first we have to produce the report, get the blessing of the receiver, of that organization, that following organization, and the court. So hopefully those people will have some resolution prior to August, September, October, and we'll be up and running with this. Anyone else want to take a crack at that?
Mr. Lawson, I just wanted to let you know, last night council passed a motion to begin authorization for a geological survey and study of that. We're splitting with Capital Regional Water, and so that is underway. I think people need to recognize things like a sinkhole like that is, from a government's perspective, I think from hopefully everybody's perspective, something you got to get right. So we do need to bring people in and look at it who have some background, and that process is underway. I don't think anybody can promise it's quick, because the first thing I think we need to know is what are we really dealing with. And as in getting our education on sinkholes and collapses and those, not all holes are the same, and we need to know to fix it correctly what we really have, and that's what these folks are coming in to do. And so I don't think we can tell you what is the time frame until they do their work. They're going to go up there first. I think they're going to start pretty quickly, and then we're going to do things around that area as well, and hopefully report to us early. So this is the type of project, frankly, that I hope gets some of it done before we get to the point where the nonprofit is giving out money, if that makes any sense, because that's its own process.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Mays, and as a board member of the Community Covenant Corporation with Nevin Midland and also board member of the Fair Housing Council. I just wanted to make my concern known about the economic development funds. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Nevin was stating during his presentation. And as part of Community Covenant Corporation, I've gone around with Nevin to various sections of the city, and particularly the uptown area where we are currently involved in blight mappings. We need to have a
Turn just a little bit so that the people watching on Channel 20 will be able to see it. Remember your audience.
Okay, we need to have a structure for what we're doing with this money. We have to have a plan. It needs to be written and it needs to be publicly vetted and you know, this is good, you know, that we're having a couple of meetings about this, but this is the process. This is a very finite amount of money that we're talking about. As far as economic development and infrastructure, we're talking about $6 million each. But I think that, Nevin can correct me if I'm wrong, we've had dollar amounts from people that were at one time involved with this blight issue within the city that says it's going to take maybe about $10 million at the minimum to correct the blight issue in Harrisburg. This seems to me like some kind of another form of CDBG grant fund that's going to be administered instead of coming from HUD, it's kind of coming in through the city instead, where everybody gets to, you know, if you have matching funds, if you have enough money, then you can tell us what you want to do with this money. When we have a problem, I've gone around to the city and I've seen the blight issue, and it's scary. I don't know how many people in this auditorium right now have been around and seen this, but it's very concerning, nightmarish situation to look at these homes and see children playing next door, see children playing out front, and to know that right next door or in the house that they're living in, it's just by the grace of God that it hasn't fallen on them. And a lot of these structures is owned by the city. We want to go around and we want to blame a lot of private owners and owners that don't live out, don't live in the city. But the fact of the matter is that HRA owns a lot of them. And we can go a long way towards fixing the blight issue if we use this money properly to try and shore up this community, shore up the buildings. If it can't be shored up and stabilized, tear it down and have some plan in place for constructively using the green space. We don't have that much money. We can't play with it. We can't just give it to the people that have development ideas and matching grant funds and leaving the rest of us out in our communities that are falling down around our heads right now. Thanks a lot.
Anyone want to speak to that? Ron, let me say we recognize very clearly it's a very small amount of money. The city budget, I believe, is $57 million and change annually, and we're talking about $16 million maybe over 5 years. So this is a very small targeted amount of money, and we can address around the edges trying to improve the situation. But you're right, there is a huge problem here, and we recognize that. Let me assure you that if the follow-up committee is anything like these people you see sitting here, your concerns are well represented. Because we've had this discussion about weeks, what kinds of projects, who gets to run the projects, all those things have been discussed in the individual committees and also in the body as a whole. We have not resolved that yet. Obviously, the follow-on committee will have some influence around that. We're trying to set the framework. We're trying to make sure that there are criteria for requesting this money and that there is a point system in place, a weighted point system in place that will reflect the needs of the people of Harrisburg. Thanks. Anybody else want to take a crack at this? Okay, next question, yes.
I'm Kim Goldberg, Associate Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council. This is a question. In addition to your strategic plan, your governance plan, and your operational plan, will your report include a technology infrastructure plan that will directly address data reporting and data warehousing for the 501c3 operational activities once it's established?
Could you repeat that question?
Right. Break it down.
Okay, I'm asking a technology question. I'm asking a technology question. For the report that they are presenting, for the setup of this 501c3, technology data collection is very important for the governance and reporting that will be required for federal, state, and city funds. Will the report include a technology infrastructure plan to address data warehousing and data reporting of all activities associated with the one and or two 501c3 entities that will be set up?
There will be a management team in place, and obviously data and information will be critical to the management of that process. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Thank you. So the answer to your question is yes, there will be one. I can't tell you the specifics of it because we're not there yet. But this is an experienced team up here. These are people who run multi-million-dollar organizations. There are people that, as myself and you guys, who run small organizations, and so we recognize how critical IT resources are, especially when it comes time to produce those reports. So we're going to have to produce those reports for our 501c3. So there is some synergy there, and we'll move on from there.
Thank you.
Is there another question? Yes. Remember, you have all those.
I believe. Hi, my name is Ron Chapman, concerned citizen of Harrisburg, and I have two issues that I'd like to discuss. First of all, there's a controversy with some 501c3 organizations that have received money from the city in the past, and it's been found that money wasn't spent for its intended or proposed purposes. And so I hope that your organization can come up with a set of guidelines among being to show for these organizations when they are reapplying or when they come to you seeking funds, that they be able to demonstrate what they did with the funds that they have received, especially the last time or perhaps 2 times back. If they claim that the money went for payroll, they should be able to show you pay records. If they claim that it went for certain expenses, they should be required to prove those expenses. Because little would you know if you may be supporting or helping to finance private for-profit business concerns. So I hope that there are a set of guidelines put in place. Secondly, I hope that some of this money can be set aside to provide jobs for the young adults in Harrisburg. You know, we talk about a crime, which is a very pressing issue in this city, in all cities nowadays, and blight. I think that if we could give these kids a sense of responsibility, a sense of well-being by them having jobs, I think that would cut down on a lot of problems that we have in the city. Whether it be simply neighborhood patrol safety watches, or whether it be makeshift work, work to just help clean up the streets and the parks in the city. I think that would help solve a lot of problems that we have with young adult crime in Harrisburg.
Anybody want to respond? There are laws, and there is a judge ultimately sitting in oversight of this effort right now, so I'm sure that the mechanisms will be in place for control. Yes.
Yeah, is this mic working?
Yeah, you're pretty close. Pretty close.
This is about the best I can do without swallowing. But okay. Those are all excellent points, and that's very specifically the level of detail that we're trying to get into with the report and recommendations. In the Harrisburg Strong report, there is a full 2 pages of bullet points regarding governance that we're supposed to hit as part of the report. including effective IRS mandated conflict of interest policies, development of procedures on retention of counsel and accounts, other advisors, development of job descriptions for any staff. And by the way, we're recommending very lightly staffed, just enough to get it done properly. Development of expenditure responsibility policies and procedures for receiving reports from recipients, a list of things like that. In addition, in our working documents, at least for those who are applying for grants, they have to show us 3 years worth of financials. They have to show capacity to undertake the project. They have a timeline on which the project has to start. They have to submit a performance bond. So we are trying to make sure that those issues are addressed by the 501c3.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Matt Runland. I'm from the Midtown section of the city. And I think the natural inclination is to talk about how funds will be distributed through this effort. But as you mentioned in your presentation, this 501c3 will also be receiving funds from external sources. And so I'm interested in learning more about that, and I hope that the plan describes the processes for receiving funds, and then how that relates to how funds are distributed in more detail once you release the plan. And I don't know if any of the panelists can comment on that.
Anybody want to take a crack at that? We do have a vision for receiving funds. So far, no one's stepped up with a checkbook, so that's rather academic at this point. But certainly, that's part of what we're trying to do. Not only leverage relative to specific projects, and we're still arguing about a one-to-one leverage situation, or 3-to-1, or 6-to-1, or certain kinds of projects within the silos. However, we are also talking about how we can effectively go out into the philanthropic community and pull additional funds in. That was part of the reason for setting up the 501c3, was so that we could bring funds in. The city tried to set up a fund for the renovation of City Hall and ran into some roadblocks relative to that, I do believe. So we learned from other situations, and we're trying to get out in front of that, make sure the 501c3 is in place, and move on from there. Now the attorney will correct everything that I just said.
Less than that I'm involved. You're the first person ever said I involved into anything. Your questions are exactly the questions that we have been asking at the table that we're at. But so you know, I think there will be. That's there. Can you hear that? Is that better?
This is.
I'll just put this right here.
All right.
Is that better? There you go. That's the kind of question we are asking at the table, but so you know, there's more than one way that it's possible for money to come in. Some additional money is going to come in just from the plan itself. You know, some additional monies that will come in, not huge amounts, I don't think, but just the way the plan is structured, there's still some monies that are coming in. The bigger question, and this is, I think, one of the things that's still being discussed, is how much do we put into, what does the corporation put into spending its time tracking down other sources of funds? And that's a policy that people can have for a long time. Do you want them competing with other nonprofits that are already here, other public entities for a limited pool of money, or more working in cooperation and coordination with those? If there's an overall arching principle, I think, that we've all got to, is that this is a corporation whose job in one is to leverage every dollar that comes into, you know, I don't think we can give it an exact formula, but you don't want that dollar to be the only dollar spent for what the project's going to be. You want to turn more public benefit out of every dollar that came in there. And I think part of that, frankly, is going to be the responsibility of the board members of the corporation, and I think there will be a small staff of them to work through that. And work with pretty much everybody for that. And one of the things that would be helpful, I think, from a board point of view, we all have ideas and we've got a lot of discussions. Remember, our job is to sort of recommend a report for how a corporation is formed and what it should do, how to hold it accountable, you know, what processes we should recommend. if people have mechanisms, and a lot of you have been in the nonprofit world and have been in the business world, that you see as having worked in innovation, is easier to hold people accountable for, or an absolute thing that is missing, accountability becomes a question. Anything like that, those are the kind of suggestions that would be very helpful to send in, because we're trying to put these recommendations into place. And I think everyone at this table is very serious about being a steward of public money. That's what we're trying to do with the public outreach, is to find, we're not the only ideas here about how to support this. And your ideas would be most welcome as we're getting down to putting the report together.
I was going to be an active listener for a little longer, but I wanted to interject here. One of the key points in our illustrious recorder, Ms. Ann, and the rest of my colleagues up here can attest to the importance that we draw down on before the conclusion of each meeting, which goes back to the blight and crime issue and having anchor projects in our community. And what I can continuously say to be put on to record in every meeting we're in is that there needs to be a project that encompasses local minority, women, and disadvantaged businesses, in particular Black and brown local businesses that are connected in a point system with every dollar that is spent via grant or via whatever we decide to call it. I always highlight 3 specific areas, one being Uptown Shopping Center as an anchor project and work its way south. Another one is the 29th Street corridor that I think deserves immediate attention in terms of where Old Wise Market was. And the other place is Paxton Street South, which would embed your earlier point of South 14th Street. That is going to be key to show the community that this is not a traditional pay-to-play. This is not a traditional good old boys get-together, network. This is really about community service. The dollars, from my standpoint, is that these dollars came from the city of Harrisburg via debt, via payback, whatever you want to call it. It originated in the city of Harrisburg, and our stance is via infrastructure and or economic development that here's where those dollars will be spent. Anyone, that's not to exclude, and I never thought I would say this, but it's not to exclude private investors or others, but the caveat to that is these individuals who are coming into this community to quote unquote help aren't really formulating partnerships with our local residents, Black, brown, green, or purple. They mean us no good. They're just like the other ones who helped us get into this mess. And so the driving force that I will always raise my voice on is to ensure that if individuals who come waving the white flag of assistance does not fully engage our local community, in particular local Black and brown minority disadvantaged business contractors, then that's going to be an issue. So I don't want you to think that this is what was highlighted earlier, just a traditional go along to get them on board. That's not the case here.
And as Carl said, we're going over that time and time again in the meetings, and that will not disappear from the table as we go forward.
Good evening, Bill Johnson, Board Chairman of the Fair Housing Council. When I hear Carl Singleton, and I hear Ms. Mays and others speak about where we are in the infrastructure, I think we have to be as broad as possible, because one of the things that has happened in the inner city is that we're losing people. We're losing people for a couple of reasons, and since the changes have been made for the appraisals, many people that we see in our office are what we call underwater with their mortgages. They owe more on the house than what the appraiser says it's worth. And what that does is that relegates people to stay in their houses even when they can't afford to or it's broken down. That's number one. And number two, the financial structure kind of looks at communities where the houses are underwater or where there's 1/5 disinvestment in the community community in terms of vacancies. They hesitant to lend money in those areas. So seniors who are on fixed wages and have utility bills going through the sky and whatnot are relegated to stay where they are. And so people who leave the neighborhood or who just walk away from their houses leave vacancies. Now, this is going to impact on other things, because as we lose population, we will not qualify for CDBG money because our population is predicated on CDBG money, which we have been underutilized on for quite some time. They gave us the undercount before, but there's no guarantee that they would do that again. So unless we have a concentrated program of infrastructure that not only touches on the corridors and those places of business, but impacts on the individual neighborhoods and communities where people live, we will continue to lose population and will impact the economic stability of the community even further. One of the things that we try to eliminate is the scourge of those houses that people don't have the ability to fix. And so as our population ages in the city, because the young people who have gotten positions and jobs and that who move out, we have to maintain them in the entire city, not just in specific areas of Midtown, Shiloh, or whatnot. We have to have housing that is available across the city. And so when we talk about these communities that Mr. Singleton did, those areas are flagship areas that people who come into the city see. Yes, they have to be dealt with, but we also have to deal with the corridors and the vacant buildings on the corner of 6th and Clay and things like that that impact the community. Because people who drive down these streets and see vacant buildings like that are not anxious to move here.
Can I
Yes.
go back? Let me elaborate on that more a little further. I was speaking specifically from this relationship with this pot of money. There is a comprehensive plan that is being developed that embeds the housing strategy within the current administration. And what that housing strategy is done, embedded in the comprehensive plan, is that it is highlighted areas by the census tract that has been deemed on a rebound and or challenged. And so that's where the city's specific comprehensive plan is honing in neighborhood by neighborhood. So I was speaking globally from this portion of money at the time I initially spoke.
One of the things that we touched on very briefly was the need for an ongoing governance and management institute. And we'll get back to that when we'll have anything to say about that before we close out this activity.
I'm Bill Cluck. I have a lot of titles. Tonight I'm a citizen. If you have a strong plan, members of the public, go to the last 3 pages, 355 through 357, and it's a 3-page checklist of what is supposed to be contained in the governance plan and action plan that this group of worthy volunteers, and thank you for your service, is supposed to develop. In looking through the list, I'm a little concerned about the absence of public participation. We're here at one of 2 meetings, and there ain't nothing for us to look at. You're going to have something for a June 19 meeting, and the question is, will we see it before the June 19 meeting, or will it be handed out at the meeting? And given the nature of deadlines, I understand the dilemma. If you want to get into the court on June 30, we're going to have a problem with this. In looking through the list of what you're supposed to develop, I'm a little concerned about what your group is going to do versus the function of the board of directors for the 501c3. Are you going to develop the budget for this organization? That appears to be, it says budget criteria. Who determines the board of directors? Who picks the people who will serve on this board of directors? Will they be compensated? And I can tell you, as a volunteer board member, a lot of time is going to be spent by this board of directors, and you should give worthy consideration for people to be compensated for their time. What's the potential salary of the executive director? Will there be a finance director? Will there be full-time legal counsel? And in that regard, in the selection of the local law firm to advise you, and I understand they're being paid by the state, the money's not coming out of the sideline, it's coming out of the Act 47 program, right?
These firm will be reimbursed out of the fund. It's part of the $100,000.
Fred, would you repeat that, please? Plan provided, as I think Doug indicated a little bit earlier, $100,000 for the task force to undertake their mission. We anticipate they're going to come in well under that figure. However, the services of the firm that has been selected will be reimbursed out of the funds that are part of the assignment. Now, my time, Mr. Goldfield's time, is being picked up by the state. That's correct. But the McGee's firm will be paid for by the funds that are available in the assignment.
And on all probability, in reference to your checklist, Bill, some of those will be in there, some will not. We're still going through and talking with those people who generated that plan concerning what was boilerplate for them and what was a critical issue for them. And we're going to focus on the critical issues. But as far as the boilerplate is concerned, there are certain things that we do have to do, for instance, 501c3 work. Here's your point back.
What was the process to select a law firm? Were other law firms in the city given the opportunity to participate?
The answer was yes.
We interviewed a short list because of the time frame, and there was a selection process. But frankly, the stuff you're talking about, Bill, is the stuff for the corporation. There's a degree at which a task force should advise the corporation, and it's got to form itself. I mean, so I don't think we're going to sit here and tell them, and I don't think a judge would approve us laying out how they're going to, meet and how they're going to do the things they do. I mean, we're going to put in a set of proposals and guidelines. It's going to go actually to the coordinator, who will then make their recommendation, and the court will approve or disapprove the recommendation about the corporation. So we're not here to write everything they do. We're here to really lay out an outline of what we think based on what we know should happen. And from our point of view is to make sure there's a way to have oversight of that. So some of the public monies can't go off the reservation, which is our concern. I think everybody's concerned to make sure that doesn't happen. So, I mean, that checklist will be what it is, but a lot of that stuff's going to be the corporation has to do that, and that doesn't exist yet. We are not the corporation. And so, I mean, we will go through suggestions, but we also, we're in a 4-month window. Some of that's going to take some real work and time. That's why they should have, we think, an executive director and someone else there to take care of that kind of stuff and work through those recommendations.
Right, a couple of more comments.
My comment wasn't meant to be a criticism. I would have hoped that the oldest law firm in Harrisburg would have provided pro bono services for the good of the city. The criteria
We got a discount.
But you and I do a heck of a lot of pro bono for the city.
They give my discount.
The development of grant application criteria, obviously given the comments from people tonight, this is the most critical issue. What's the basis upon which funds will be loaned or awarded? And I'm not clear on the role of your task force versus the role of the corporation once it's formed. So to me, the most important thing is who picks the board of directors and who selects the executive director and the other consultants and professionals that will work there. And what's your anticipated budget for this? I heard 16 million, but I also heard 6.1 in 2 silos. How much money do we actually have in the bank today? Is it two accounts at 6.1 each?
I'm glad you asked that question. I prepped Fred prior to tonight's meeting because I knew that was coming up. And Fred's going to give you the answer is.
The strong plan set aside $16 million for what were identified as 3 silos. one for economic development, one for infrastructure, and one for the OPEB. So the $16 million initially is set aside for those three to be divided. Roughly 2/3 go to the economic development and to the infrastructure, and about $3 million and change goes to the OPEB trust. There is an additional $10 million that will be coming from PennDOT over a 5-year period of time, $2 million per year. When the strong plan was originally prepared in the summer of 2013 and confirmed by the court in September of 2013, there was uncertainty as to what type of transportation money may come about. So the plan provided for, and there is now an agreement that is being developed that would cement the $10 million from PennDOT for transportation-related activities. That is over and above the $16 million that was set aside. The total coming to the city is actually $26 million for infrastructure, for economic development, and for OPEB. Does that answer your question?
Why is the PennDOT money going to the corporation?
The PennDOT money will go to the city. Actually, that money may not even be in the form of cash to the city. It may be in the form of services. Those are issues that are under negotiation right now with PennDOT. So there may not actually be cash in the bank per se. It may be rather services that are provided by PennDOT, but with an equivalent value of $10 million over the 5-year time period.
The example we used in our meeting had to do with there being some infrastructure problems that the capital region and water might address. Someone would do the digging, someone would do the replacing, and oh yeah, by the way, since PennDOT has got skin in the game, they would do the repaving, or if it is a PennDOT road, then we would allow them to do all the repaving. So those are the kinds of things we're working, but we are under a timeline here, so we will not have all the answers going into the game. Does anyone have a first question? Then we'll get to seconds.
Ron Burkholder, and I'm going to address this gentleman back here who said he was a citizen. I'll say the same. I don't know if you noticed, because our local paper covers a lot of local news, but Obama had his Attorney General, Eric Holder, issue a decree, which is very unusual. Usually legislators make laws, and maybe sometime I'll explain this. But the decree was that you were talking about opportunities for brown and black young men. And Holder said that crack cocaine and powder cocaine was going to be treated as the same. We can't get ahead if we have so many minorities with jail records. And I think that's a very good thing that we are going to get a lot of people out of jail under that decree. I just wanted to mention that.
Unless you'd like to respond.
Sure, go ahead.
Very quickly, I want to get to people who have not had an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay, first of all, sir, I never even used those words, black, brown, or whatever. That came from a member of the panel. They came from a member of the panel.
Okay.
Now, we may look similar. I believe we have some similar.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I do not see color.
Okay, well, but let me say that whatever the president said about, and with the Attorney General, I think that's a separate issue than what's at hand right now. You know, I am a grateful American citizen, twice under discharged U.S. Marine. And I respect and I love the president, and I'm dedicated to the betterment of all of us.
Me too.
Okay, I believe.
Thank you. Any other first questions before?
Hi, Ed Smith, President on the street. I understand that the overall strong plan is like $1.1 billion. Is that a correct estimate of the expenditure of the overall debt, refinance debt? Is it something around there? Is that close?
The overall strong plan, it retired about $600 million in debt, roughly, that the city of Harrisburg either owed or was a guarantor on, because of the circumstance would end up being at risk of paying as the guarantor, which is what got us into the hole that we were in. I think numbers can be whatever you want them to be. It just depends what you decide to add and not add. I've seen the 1 point something billion. It just depends. Sometimes people add the same numbers twice. 600 million is what was paid off, and part of that was really a shifting over of how we handle the garage system, how we handle the incinerator system, and how much money, frankly, people that we owed money to decided that they were never going to get paid and walked away from in settlement agreements. So I don't remember the total number, but that was a number that we owed by the time we got to the other end that was removed from the backs of Harrisburg taxpayers.
Did you have a
Well, I had seen 1.1 billion in the paper. Like 12 million is like 1% of that, of the strong plan. We have this great committee and oversight and all that stuff, but as a person that's watched this thing balloon from $25 million to now $1 billion with very little oversight, all these bond insurance, debt payments over and over again, and unbelievable fees charged. What was the cost of General Lynch and his team's expenditures to the city? I've been told it was like $16 million or something like that. It's a phenomenal amount of money on an impoverished city. I live in a part of the neighborhood where if people are working, they're working for $7.25 an hour and going to food banks and soup kitchens to get by. And these guys are charging that kind of money on this kind of a city. It's phenomenal that 1% of the overall plan is receiving this kind of scrutiny, and that just kind of obscene overcharges, overexpenses, rate pillage went on uncontested. And it leaves me with a sick feeling in my stomach that this has transpired. And it's not only in Harrisburg, Detroit's another setting. There's all these different municipal bonds, and there's kind of this scheme has gone on with easy credit on projects that were known to fail. And they've really put us in a bad state of affairs as a nation, morally and spiritually. And we see all the dilapidation around us. And my backyard has 3 piles of garbage that's been there, the alley, for at least 6 months. And it's just, we have to live amongst this context of degradation. And it's just, there's a moral climate here that just, it makes me sick to my stomach. And I had to say something about it, so thank you.
Thank you, Ned. And David Uncle shared some of your concerns. And hopefully the boards are looking at that. Any other first questions? Any other first questions before we come back around?
My name is Arlene Miller. I'm a citizen. I did get the answer to who appoints the board for the nonprofit organization. How does the board exist?
I want to know that too. Go ahead.
Well, the short answer is that in the strong plan, the final selection of the initial board is by the coordinator. So it's part of community economic development. Part of what we're looking at, though, I mentioned in my presentation, is how large should the board be. We thought large enough to have diversity, but small enough that it's operable. And then I would anticipate that part of our recommendation will be who are the types of people that should be on. Do you have professional qualifications, residency, a number of things like that will probably be part of the recommendation to the coordinator's office.
There are no whims up here. We're struggling with that. And one of the other things we're struggling with is once the board is set up, who has the authority to remove, expand, et cetera, that board? We want it to be autonomous. So we've got no whims up here, so we're wrestling with these things. Any other first questions?
Tim Delphick. Actually, you kind of stole my question there. I was wondering how people are appointed to the board and committees and things like that. I think it might be important to have some of the for lack of better terms, grassroots people in the city of Harrisburg that live there and that may not have the expertise in some of the fields, but do have the expertise of living in the city of Harrisburg and going about their business in Harrisburg. I may have missed something. This is probably for Fred Reddick. And the question was asked, how much money do we really have to work with? I hear 16 million and I hear 2 silos. Adding each silo is worth 10 million, so that makes it 36 million total. You know, so how many dollars specifically, and not what we got this year, we got that, how many dollars do we specifically have to work with? 16 million here, and here 2 silos, but I really don't know what specifically the silos represent.
Fred's going to address that. We're still struggling with those things, even though Fred may give us a number. There is still the issue of whether or not the silos are porous, whether or not an activity or a project can span both economic development and infrastructure. We just talked about that relative to the water. So Fred will answer the number piece, but as far as the porous nature or lack thereof of the silos is something we're still trying to determine, or for a specific project.
The number, Tim, is there is $16 million that is in the bank that was set aside for the 3 silos that were anticipated in the strong plan. The task force is looking to combine the economic development and infrastructure into one. The total there would be in the range of around 12 million plus, a little over 12 million. The additional roughly 3 million goes to the OPEB trust. That money is in the bank, accruing interest at this point. In addition, there is $10 million that is to come from PennDOT over the 5-year time period, $2 million per year. Those dollars, the actual use of those dollars is currently being negotiated, and as indicated to Bill, that may come in the form of services, or it may come in the form of cash, or some combination thereof.
And here's what we don't want to happen. We don't want the administration sitting there saying, when are you guys going to kick in? We don't want the people saying, when is this going to kick in? This is not pie in the sky. We have a deadline, and we assume that after we go to the court, we move forward.
Don Barnett, I did not hear a response to Bill Clark's question about is the public going to have an opportunity to review your plan before the June 19th meeting?
Someone who's more familiar with the court deadlines speak to this. My understanding was we were targeting June 30th to have this wrapped up, draft ready. But it is at the discretion, if I understood what we said, it was at the discretion. No, you have to set a hearing date, right? Neil, one of the attorneys in the room.
Well, I think what the process is, what we're doing is again, we're sending the recommendations formally to the state, to DCED. No one's filing in court on June 30th. Our assignment ends by June 30th. To make the recommendation, then the state, through Mr. Reddick's office, prepares the process to be followed with the court, which I think everyone who's been around will have the ability to look at and see because it's a public file. On the input, I'm a bottom line. No, I mean, I think you're not going to have a real chance for input, other than that you're going to get a chance to keep commenting, and people argue this all the time. The document will be put together. It can get tweaked here and there. It's not done yet. But it's not that we're going to say that we're going to have it open and there's going to be a public comment period like you might have in something else. because of the time frame. And some of us who've worked there know that a public comment period is where you have 30 days here, and then time to put another amendment out, and then it's looked at. So in that sense, there's not going to be that public input. But frankly, I think a lot of people know the people on this board, and if you're emailing, calling, and texting, your ideas are getting into the discussion. And, you know, that's the reality. But all we're doing is making the recommendation to the state. I mean, and that's the bottom line of how it works. It's not that we'll be quiet if the state didn't go with us, but the state has been very, very cooperative on this. Mr. Reddy has put in more hours than anyone should have to put in to a position like this when he's running a whole lot of other things. The judge has been very open to concerns when they are raised in the court. So I think there's going to be, you know, the city's going to participate, the state's going to participate, the court's going to participate, and the people on this group are going to participate, trying to make sure it gets done right. There's no way to do it perfect, but there's an awful lot of people who are shrinking violence here who are going to, you know, push real hard that this is done as a solid product that, frankly, that we think we'll be proud of at the end of the day, and hope protects the money and the people of Harrisburg for the long term.
Let me say something as well, because being in this position, because you're in a position on the board, does not mean you're less of a resident of this community. I'll put my book of service to this community, independent of this board or any other affiliations against anyone. And that's not to prop myself up, but at the same time, don't have the idea that just because individuals or members, that there's some insider information that the community's not represented. Well, it's not that kind of administration or good old boys network anymore, like times past, that has gotten us into this mess. To the gentleman's question about what are the numbers in terms of 1.6 billion or 400 million, 600 million, whatever. Well, maybe what you were talking about was the total debt of the city and the school district, because then those numbers will get you to that over the billion mark. The same players or the same individuals related to bonds and things like that, there aren't the same people who are pulling strings and control. They're not happy that a Carl Singleton or others that impact this community are sitting in decision-making positions. So don't disregard the public or the resident interest just because everything is not open to your liking. There are still individuals up here on this board who advocate, and more than not, I'm not going to point at anybody who's not, because I don't believe there are any that are comfortable operating adversely against the best interest of the community of Harrisburg. Let me just say that.
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Nelma Wright. I'm with the Fair Housing Council of the Capital Region. And I appreciate all the hard work that the board here is attempting to do, but there are a couple of points of clarification that I need. It seems that the timeline is a real concern, and I'm just listening to some of the comments and some of the feedback from the group, and I do have some concerns about, first and foremost, if there is true time constraint, you're actually setting up another 501c3. And I'm just wondering, is it possible in the respective time to use the existing 501c3 agencies? There's some agencies already in place. So is it possible, instead of taking the time to reestablish another entity, to use the entities that are already in existence and have them run through the process? And also with the time frame, when you're looking at having a public comment, there is a discrepancy there, because there won't be an additional time for real public comment with the actual documents in hand. Now, you mentioned if you know you or something of that nature, people can email you and reach out to you, but there is a finite group in this room, and it may not represent all the people who need to reach out and have a comment. So So where I appreciate what you guys are trying to do with respect to the timeline, it somehow, kind of hurts the transparency just a bit because of that restraint. I'm just wondering, how can you engage the existing 501c3s? And also, when you're looking at the criteria, you're talking about matching funds, you're talking about having performance bonds and so forth. So again, it's just a little prohibitive for some of the groups. Thank you very much.
The short answer to your first question is no. It cannot be one of the existing 501c3s because we have a court order that says so. We got here from a court order. We didn't get here because we got together at a meeting. So the court has dictated what that part of our mission is, and we have to abide by that.
But that's the easy part. That is well on its way.
Right.
501c3s are not an issue at this point.
The second part of your question is don't confuse the two. The whole idea of the 501c3 is when the actual money is being spent on actual projects, that it's open to the public and the input there. Not on the concept of what is a 501c3, but the whole point is to put together one where the public has input to that body and create that, which is an unusual 501c3 arrangement, where the public has the ability to have input and comment. And that's the commitment we're trying to make happen here. So we're not spending any money. That is where you're going to want your efforts. Where is those dollars going? What are the projects that are being proposed? And how does the public know about it and get a chance to participate before those decisions are made? So that's the difference. We're just sort of creating the front end of this start. But that is where the public is going to really need to be engaged, including other 501c3 groups and others that are there to monitor and say, that project works for Harrisburg, this project does not, and here's why. And so that's where the opportunity is. So I think you're in a little bit ahead. I think it's the right question. I think it's for the next body that comes along to make sure that they're being held accountable.
And as far as performance bonds and things like that, not everything is going to be bricks and mortar. Keep that in mind, okay? Okay, first questions, then I'll come back. I've got a first question over there. I'm going to come back to Don for clarification of his. We're going to circle briefly around to Nevin. He has some comments. Bill, you're next in the queue. Anybody else? This is the lightning round.
I just want to address the concern about the criteria that are being developed and even down to the level of how are those silos going to be divvied up. Keep in mind, we're just putting together recommendations that not only are they recommendations to the receiver or to the recovery plan, but they're also recommendations for the future board. Once the future board becomes enacted, they can take our recommendations or they can toss our recommendations. So that again is a time to be engaged with the future board to determine and make sure that the criteria that is of importance to this community, that they are indeed included in the plan to move forward.
Hi, Jane Alice with Capital Area Neighbors and resident of Harrisburg. And I know what you're talking about is just recommendations, but I think the two key things that we would like to hear, hopefully before June 19th, but definitely on June 19th, are your recommendations for what the characteristics of the people on the board will be, and what the criteria will be for the two silos. And you're here for public input, and those are the things we need to provide you with public input for. Thank you.
All right, Sarah's going to Don. Clarification, is there another remark?
The reason for my question was, it sort of seems not very conducive to get good input if you're just presented something at the meeting, and you have to look at it at that time. Even if it's just a week before, that at least the people who are here would be able to, you have email addresses for contact, or maybe put it on some website, just so that we're not completely in the dark before the next meeting. And I was not trying to impugn anybody's reputation up there. I know several of them, so.
Don, as a member of the Public Outreach ways that we can perhaps share some of the work product that we have so far in advance of that next meeting.
A couple of quick comments. One is, frankly, I think it become apparent this thing, in terms of public, should have been started sooner, so you could have worked on what the public's thoughts were, as opposed to us trying to figure out what we're about and then look for it later on. That said, I do hope you get something out here. The other thing I think is that we do have 501. I want to put a point on some of the stuff that's been put out here by Mel Johnson and others from the Housing Council. There's a whole community out here that can work on some of what's going on, if you actually set the stage for that to occur, as opposed to trying to figure out how to put it into one entity that somehow is going to do all kinds of things. If you want to work in the neighborhoods and you want to start doing something that gets houses underwater out of underwater, then you've got to clean up the blight and crime. There's no money here for crime. There's money here for blight. Okay? And if you're going to take a pittance of what's an amount of money, which is $6 million, we're going to start trying to figure out how to slice and dice it and start taking money out for administration. By the time we're done, we're going to be looking at each other wondering where the hell it went. Okay? This thing is not that complex. Fix the blight. Work on the blight. Cut it loose. There are all kinds of people out there who can start working on homes. African Americans and Latinos and others of color that can start working on homes, that can start building this community again. And then not only that, but then they can start building businesses to serve the people that are coming back into the community. Right? Economic development is done by taking care of blight. I don't get why this is so complex. I really don't.
Thank you. All right. Any final first questions before we go to Bill? Any other on the timeline?
I heard a legal interpretation from members of the task force. I'm reading from the appendix. Necessary components of the task force governance proposal and action plan. The plan will contain the following. I'm now hearing these are merely suggestions and recommendations to the Act 47 coordinator, who apparently will make a final decision as to what will be submitted to the court for court approval. I like everybody, I trust everybody, but I'm a little concerned about the process. What will be binding on this board of directors for the new corporation? Will they be able to? Thank you for your recommendations. Thank you, Judge Ledbetter. But we're not going to have matching grant criteria. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. Are they going to be able to act independently?
At the end of the day, you know what the answer is to that question.
It depends.
Well, not just that. No, there's a court order. I mean, that's what it is. They're created by a court order. And that is where you hold people accountable. If they come to an existence because the court says you're doing X, Y, and Z, and they decide they're going to do A, B, and C, you know, both the city, the state, and I think everybody else who's an interest will be back in the courtroom because they're under a court order for how they're supposed to handle this public money. So, you know, maybe I'm too far into the weeds because I can get there, it'll be pretty easy, Bill. But you know, when I say it's going to be recommended, that's technically what it's going to be. I don't expect the state is going to come in and change what this board did in any major way. I mean, the question is just simply getting the product in a package that gets in front of a court so they can understand it and know what they're making an order with. This is just sort of, you know, this is the opening part of the process. Again, the real thing is how does the corporation run and where does that money go? And how do people, whether they're nonprofits who apply, whether they're corporations, whether they're municipalities, and all of us, how do they get that money and get the projects? And everyone here knows there's competing projects because there's always more need than there is resources. And it's not that, and someone's going to be making those decisions, and they're always tough decisions about which one to fund.
Do we have a final comment from the panelists?
Well, I think I may have caused some confusion by saying that it could get changed. And I think I go back to that conversation that we had was more about the weighting of the different criteria. We had talked about how they would be weighted and whether or not that would be something that would carry forward, or if that's something that could be further developed. So again, I apologize for confusion, but we're working through this, and it doesn't need to be this complicated, but because we're dealing with public money and because we're dealing with lots of competing interests, we are trying to get it narrowed down as closely and as precisely as we can at this point in time, but allowing for the ability of the actual corporation to make the real decision. So we're in a really interesting spot because we're just putting together the criteria and the framework, but not actually making the future decisions. So.
All right, we're coming down to the end of our allotted time at this fine facility. Speaking of this facility, we're holding this up as a model. We are also holding up another model that exists at the corner of Her and Cameron Street, and that is that fiasco with the job project, is that correct? So we are keeping those poles in mind. So we want to make sure that we do things, if we're talking about economic development that benefit the community, if we're looking at infrastructure, we want to understand very clearly that there are non-bricks and mortar, macro bricks and mortar aspects to our infrastructure. And we've actually talked about the parks being part of our infrastructure. Obviously, our housing infrastructure is part of our infrastructure. So I'm sorry you don't agree with that, we'll argue about that in private, but the point I'm trying to make is nobody is making a hard and fast decision from this panel this day. We're trying to get the input, we're trying to move forward, we're trying to meet the deadlines, and then we are trying to turn over that mantle of stewardship to a follow-on committee. Any final comments from the panel members?
I hope that everybody filled out a form when they came in. We have some door prizes to give out. We didn't want you to come here and go home empty-handed. So before we close out, we have 4 just little things to give out. So Ann, do you have those names of those lucky winners who came tonight? I don't know if this is economic development or not. E-Flag. Is E-Flag still here? Must be present to win. E-Flag. Are you here?
Next one.
Okay. Stanley Lawson, are you here?
Is that fair?
Bill and Jean Bertle, B-I-R-T-L-E.
Bill and Jean.
Sorry, Bill. Camille, are you still
Bill's
here?
still here.
No, you must be present to win. Okay. This, help me with that name.
Talisha.
Alicia. Oh,
Is that all 4? Did we get 4? Okay. Millicent Greer, are you in? Millicent Greer. Okay. See if you come to the meeting on the 19th, there'll be some more prizes. Darlene Waller, are you here, Darlene? Ned Smith. See, your opinion does count.
all right.
Okay.
Thank you. Final comments, lightning round for the panelists. Dave wants me to wrap it up. Anybody want to listen to what Dave has to say besides me? Yes? Yes.
A quick comment. Blight has been something that we have discussed, and a good way to address blight is through redevelopment. And I just want to say on behalf of Ken, thank you all for coming. We appreciate your input.
Thank you all very much. We will have another session. Don't forget about us in the meantime. Thank you.